Welcome to RGV On the Rise, a limited series podcast about the economy and opportunities of Hidalgo County, the Rio Grande Valley, and South Texas. Please say hello to today's guest.
Welcome, former McAllen Mayor Jim Darling, who's now a member of the Region M Planning Group, which is a part of the Texas Water Development Board. He's also a longtime president of the Rio Grande Regional Water Authority, and these qualifications give us some good leeway into our discussion today about water and the region. One of the major developmental and economic issues of this region is the availability of water. Are we adequately addressing that issue?
Well, I guess it's adequately addressing is a kind of a word of art, I think. I think what would happen is everybody woke up because we hit the all-time low this year. Prior was 1998, and so we are addressing those issues. I think when you talk about water, you have to do two. One is the municipal side, and the other is agriculture. And historically, agriculture has been the giant, 80% probably now still, 20% on the municipal and mining side. So yeah, I think you address those two issues differently.
I wanted to ask some of the challenges, but before I do that, can you give us a sense of the complexities of this issue? It's not as simple as turning on your tap.
Yeah, it's pretty unique to the United States of America. We get a lot of our water from Mexico. The major watershed is in Mexico. So when it rains, we always say, hope there's a hurricane, but it's south of the border, and where it's not populated, and that fills up the three reservoirs that we depend on from the Mexican side. So we're a little bit complicated, number one, from that standpoint. And the second one is agricultural came first. In most areas of the state, there was a town, and ag grew around it. That was part of it. We're here, agriculture was first. There was agriculture before there were cities. And so we're still driven by ag owning the water, a lot of the water. They provide the delivery system from the river, so you have that third-party element, which is different than almost anybody in the United States.
And adding to that complexity is kind of the balkanization of the ag districts. There's, I think, 28 water districts in South Texas now.
28, right.
All competing with trying to get the same source of water. Can you delve into that a little bit?
Yeah, they... way back when there was a system of if I claim water, first anybody can claim the water, get it, and there was a filing with the Board of Engineers way back when, and so the river is way over allocated. There were more people claiming and filing them. They didn't say, okay, you can, it's already done. They just took the notices in. So in the 50s, they called the river, and that's where they said, okay, here's the water rights. We're going to have to prove them up. And the cities went there. The districts supplied the water to the city. And so they asked the cities, how much water are you using? And they said X, and they said, we're going to double it, and that's your water right going forward. And so that's pretty well what it's been. There's no new water rights. So cities had to depend on buying water rights from the city or whatever, from the agricultural people who hold most of those waters. So that's still there. And the agricultural people are the ones that deliver the city's water. So the only cities that take directly divert are Brownsville and Rio Grande City, I think.
So I learned recently, you talk about the 1950s. Some of these water districts go back to the 1800s, early 1900s.
Yeah, they were here first in the late, say, 1890. And what they did is they had rich, big landowners, right? And they just developed that land. They brought people from the north down here to buy plots and all that and farm it. And they supplied the water. And then they created from the private ones. They created public ones, irrigation districts, which are public bodies. And so they could raise debt by ad valorem taxation, flat rate taxes. And then in McAllen, for instance, 1905, well, there was a water district here already. It was all mapped out, and so the city was created that. So, yeah, the districts came first, the cities came second. And for that reason, the districts held most of the water, and they provide the delivery system.
Well, let's get into some of the solutions. You've given a sense of the challenges. But before we get into the solutions, I need you to explain the International Boundary and Water Commission. What is their function, and what role do you play with them?
Yeah, that goes back to the 1800s when they finished all the war with Mexico and all that. It's okay, we got a border, let's define it. Most of it wasn't a river, right? It's in the west, in California, New Mexico, Arizona, and then only becomes a river really a wet river at Fort Quitman. Most of the time, that's dry between there. So, yeah, they actually did the boundary first and made sure there were boundary markers and those kind of things. And second, they manage the water. The water comes down from the Colorado, flows into Mexico, but it originates in Texas. So they deal with Mexico and the Mexican counterpart in the delivery of water out west, and of course then on the Rio Grande for our purposes between Fort Quitman in the Gulf.
And that leads us to what I've heard a lot about discussed lately, the 1944 Water Treaty. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so they decided in '44, let's figure out how this is going to develop, and that was pre-reservoirs, right? And so they had a '44 treaty, and essentially said all the water coming from the United States is United States water. Some of the water that's behind the major tributaries of Mexico is 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 Mexico, 1/3 ours. And then between what inflows from Mexico is 50-50. So that's kind of the way it was developed, and that's how they operated over these years. One of the things they put in the '44 treaty was a guarantee from Mexico of 350,000 acre-feet a year over a 5-year period. And it's a cycle. And every 5 years, it's a brand new cycle from the major tributaries. And so that's kind of been the issue. If you've been reading the news, is they're way behind in that, and they normally have been. And what they count on, what we all count on, is a hurricane, a benevolent hurricane or a tropical storm, and that's normally how the Mexicos, they fall way behind and they pay it. We get a hurricane, pay it up. Unfortunately, we haven't had one in 11 years, and so they're having difficulty. There's a demand that they pay up. Well, they don't have the water to pay up. So even if they said, okay, we don't have the water, and so.
And even if they did have the water, there is new demands in Mexico because of the growth of the agricultural industry, correct?
Yeah, and that really affected more of the other 1/3, the surface flow from between the reservoirs and the river was, if you look at a satellite, it was a desert, and now it looks like the Garden of Eden. So they're farming that area. But nothing in the treaty says they couldn't. This assumption was they wouldn't. And so that's really, we don't have as much water coming in that 1/3 at all either.
Now, my understanding is in the Rio Grande Valley, the dependency on water emanates almost 90% from the Rio Grande River itself. It's not a lot of groundwater, but it's mostly surface water. Is that accurate?
What's been developed, we're sitting in the Gulf Coast Aquifer, which runs kind of on the east side of Texas. But the problem, when it hits Cameron County, it kind of moves way over, so like half of Cameron County is cut off, and it flows that way past Rio Grande City and there. And Commissioner, it's an ocean of water. I mean, there's a lot of water. It's briny. You have to treat it. You can't mix it too well with your existing river water because it's so briny. The salts have to be removed. So very few people are using that water. The most are the water supply corporations, because they weren't there when all this happened. They were above the irrigation districts, for instance. They developed above those, and so they don't have an irrigation district supplying them water or the original supply of water. So they've had to do something else. And so they're probably the leaders in groundwater here, and they use reverse osmosis. The issue with that is it's very expensive initially, the upfront cost, but treatment is actually less expensive because the chemicals on the river water are much greater. You don't have the chemicals with reverse osmosis.
And what are some of the other solutions that are being discussed?
Well, there's a lot of people talking about ocean water. And a couple of problems with ocean water is you got to go 3 miles out in the Gulf of Mexico to discharge your brine. It's got a big from a standpoint of environmental, it's a big problem of what you do with the brine.
So the desalinization process extracts all the brine, the salt, and something's got to be done with that.
And so then the second problem is a distribution problem. So you can't you can drill a well almost any place where the aquifer is Gulf Coast, but the only place you can have your plant is on the river, right? It makes sense. And so the distribution system to get it to McAllen and Brownsville, Laredo, there's been talk about Laredo and Monterrey, Mexico, is really expensive. And to operate is even more expensive. So, the problem with that is that source is on one edge of the demand.
And you mentioned earlier that we've had an unprecedented low level of water this year. When you say that, where is that measured?
At both reservoirs. Our primary Falcon and Amistad reservoirs are our only surface water reservoir system. So anything else is in the river and flows through. For instance, the San Juan River is south of us. It flows, whatever it is, it goes out to the Gulf. It's not used. So those are the two ones we use, and those are the trigger points for when, like the cities have to use, they're going to their conservation mode. And we hit a historic low. The historic low was 19% in 1998, and we went below that this summer. And we're just above it now. And kind of the scary part of 98, right around this time in mid-August, they had a hurricane, so the lowest of the history went straight up and filled up the reservoirs. And so if you look at us now, it's the second driest year was last year. And so it kept going down, and finally this year we hit low. And then last year it shows we didn't go much higher. So if we have last year's weather, we're about 4 or 5% low. We're going to stay that way. So we're going to stay below 20, which is not good, especially for agriculture.
And exacerbating all that is a drought, correct?
Yeah, droughts causing all that. Water usage, and some of that, but really it's a drought. And the other thing is they finally did a hydraulic study, IBWC, you're going to talk about that. They've never really done one. They just kind of measure what was coming in, but they didn't measure what was being produced and all that. And the surprising thing, and I don't know how much they've documented that they reported it, is the United States side has been diminished even more because of drought and usage than the Mexican side. Both are heavily, heavily affected, but we were getting more water than the 1/3 out of the United States side. And now we're getting less and less on that side and the Mexican side, so it's really caused a problem. And there's in the Mexican side, you can threaten them. There's nothing you can do on the United States side.
Well, and at least at this end of the Rio Grande, there's two rivers that feed into it, the Pecos and the Devil's River.
Right.
And those two are also being diminished in record levels.
And they come in way up west, and they go into Lake Amistad. They're farther away from us. And Pecos kind of comes right out of the west. It goes south out of the west. The Devil's River kind of comes south almost. And that's really an extension of the Edwards Aquifer. When it comes out of the ground at near Del Rio, becomes the Devil's River and flows into Amistad at that point. And,
which is an interesting kind of condition because if you're talking about the Edwards Aquifer, you're talking about water demands from both San Antonio and Austin.
Yeah, nobody's mentioned that yet. I mean, they just finished the hydrology study, but the study was we got more water from the Devil's River than we thought we were getting, and that's gone down more in the last 20 years than anything else supplying the reservoir system. And if that's Edwards Aquifer, you know why. San Antonio's using that water. They already have struggled with that. You know, so I was thinking, when we did the Call of the River back in the 50s and 60s, we thought the Rio Grande was the Rio Grande without realizing that tributary. And so...
Can you explain your role both as it relates to the Region M planning group as well as the IBWC?
Yeah, I'm a chairman of Region M this year for the last 3 years. I'll be through this water cycles, 5 years water cycles. And before that, I was with the city, and we dealt with Region M before. And then on the Regional Water Authority, we're a group that was made up of irrigators, and for some reason we didn't get reappointed, and so I'm the last person on the board. I was appointed by Hidalgo County, and so I'm the executive director of that. Before they ended their quorum, they made me executive director. And we have one project, a major project we did is a groundwater project. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on a regional project, and we did that in 2014. Sent it out to all the cities, and nobody was interested. And it includes water out of the Gulf, it includes groundwater, it includes a distribution system. So I tell people, don't spend a bunch of money on engineering right now if everybody's talking about regionalization. You got the plan. Nothing's changed. Maybe the demand a little higher, but nothing's changed from that standpoint. So they could pick that up and run with it if they had cities that were willing to do that.
Let's talk a little about regionalization. There was an estimate that was floated around recently that the infrastructure needs for Texas alone over the next 50 years are in the neighborhood of $168 billion. And the net message derived from that is that if we truly want to fulfill our own needs, particularly infrastructure needs, we have to act as a region as opposed to individual water districts. Can you expand on that notion?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot cheaper to build 10 million gallon or 20 million gallon facility as opposed to 21 million gallon facility. It's just cheaper. Everybody that looks at that knows, okay, it's cheaper to build a larger one, to operate a larger one's easier, et cetera. And you're not competing for parts. And one of the big things they have in the water area, and I think almost anything, is getting parts and putting all that stuff together and then finding workers to operate it. And so that just from that standpoint is regional makes a lot of sense because you have one entity do it. Plus you have the bonnet indebtedness of a larger group, a regional facility, which is better rates, for instance, especially for the smaller areas. And it just makes more sense to do a regional project.
In some ways, it's a little counterintuitive, the notion that if you, as a region, ask for more money, you're more likely to get it than a smaller entity asking for smaller amounts of money.
Sure, and it's complicated, and it's a long process, and the bigger you are, the more attention you get and the more you can throw at it from a standpoint of consultants and experts and those things.
But there seems to be a track record. If we talk about transportation, the MPO, we created a regional metropolitan planning organization with a lot of pushback initially. But once it was established, suddenly we were flooded with money. Is that accurate?
I was a mayor then. You had to give up pride. That was probably the hardest part, say, okay, I'm not going to be the big guy anymore, and you have a board do that for you. And we couldn't get certain funds because we weren't a regional program. And so that was the biggest thing. And now we can't spend it fast enough. And so, that's good. It's coming up with the projects. They have a shovel-ready deal. So we found out we were complaining about the money, but then we have the opportunity to say, hey, by the way, it's got to be shovel-ready. So we had a little learning curve there, and we're up and running, and we're doing things we never thought we would do in the Valley.
But that same principle can be applied to water.
Sure, same concept.
Okay.
Certainly the same concept.
Let's talk a little bit about the IBWC and its water woes with Mexico. What is being done to try to encourage Mexico to provide the water that is owed us according to the treaty?
And we have Commissioner Henera, our new committee. Well, she's been here, I think, over 5 years now.
Okay.
She is great. She's very, very, very active. She's in our area all the time. And she's really pushing it. And so it's just a negotiation. And one of the problems in Mexico, you had a change of presidency, and you have a change over there, and so it kind of made everything start all over again about, hey, we're not going to get a new treaty, but they do minute orders. And so they have a minute order adjusting where the treaty needs adjusted.
And my understanding, a minute order is kind of an amendment to the treaty that says this is now how we interpret the treaty.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. And so that's what they're trying to work out. One of the biggest problems with the treaty is really not so much the United States side. It's the Mexican side gets 2/3 of all the water they give us. And that goes to the state of Tamaulipas. So you have the state of Chihuahua and the state of Nuevo León say, wait a minute, that's our water. And to fulfill your obligation to the United States, so you give them 1 gallon, we have to give 2 to opposite Mexican cities. And it kind of complicated it because they are different. Tamaulipas is a different party than the president's party. So the pressure on the president was, how can I release that to my own strength politically?
Beyond the political pressures, there's also practical pressures. My understanding is even if Mexico just suddenly gave us all the water that it owed us, the demand because of population growth, industry uses, still exceeds what the capacity is there.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, sure it is. And then it's not distributed the way the Mexican government wants it. So one of the minute orders, we don't care about the 2-to-1. As long as you give us water, you can do what you want. And the last time they paid it back was almost 5 years ago. They owed us a lot of debt. It was at the end, pressure on Mexico. They said, okay, you can have all the water that we had in Falcon. So they didn't trigger the 2-for-1 because it was already there. It's just 100% Mexican water was already there. So that's how they paid us back. And they had riots in Chihuahua because of that. So one of the mentors in the United States saying, we don't care about the 2-to-1. We don't want to abandon our friends in Tamaulipas, but if that's what's not getting our water, then we'll do that. And a lot of this is agriculture. I keep telling us the way the water master works is the cities own the bottom of the reservoir. So we own the bottom 225,000 acre feet. We get 1/12 of our water dedicated to us every month. So we always have 225. And then there's 75,000 acre feet of operational. And that helps operate the dams and electrical system and all those kind of things. I always say our reservoir is always full. We haven't run out. Our biggest issue, besides we have more than over 300,000 acre feet, and they ought to raise that limit now and raise the operating reserve, is getting the water to us without agriculture. And so we say, we got enough water, but can we get it to us? And so they did a study in '98. The Grande study said the average city would get 68% of his water without ag in the system. Obviously, Brownsville would get less than Laredo, right, because they're farther away. But the 68% was how much you would get in the river. And then you got to get it from the river to your water plant because the irrigation districts control the water plant.
That's the concept of push water, correct?
Yeah. Okay. So without any water in the canals,
you can't push it in.
They can't push it in. Raymondville is kind of the prime example. Because they're so far north, it would take 70%. Well, if they're only getting 68% in their water from the river, and it takes 70% to get it there, they wouldn't get.
They're in net negative.
They're in the negative. McAllen's a little better because we're right on the river with our canal systems not far away, the district's canal system. But that's the big point is that's where push water comes in. We own the bottom of the reservoir. We got all the water, a year's supply always, but getting it to us without agriculture is a challenge.
Finally, there's a new concept that at least new to me hearing about, and that is diversifying your water portfolio. Tell us a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, the groundwater. Make groundwater part. Some can mix, like McAllen has a well near their treatment plant, and they're mixing 1 million gallons a day. That's about all they can do. Otherwise, it'd have to be treated as river osmosis. So that's at that plant, that's more than 10%. So there's 10% out there just mixing the water, which is a pretty cheap method to be able to do that. Other ones, reverse osmosis. There's groundwater. Let's use the groundwater. There's water reuse. For instance, McAllen's North plant, sewage treatment plant, not a drop of water comes out of that plant that's not being used at the power plants in Edinburgh or Tres Lagos.
A new subdivision in McAllen.
That was distribution was an issue because you have to have a separate distribution, and that was where it was a big enough project where the developer said, in like Sherryland, he has to go buy water rights. And so he said, instead of buying water rights, I'm going to sign a contract with the city of McAllen for their sewer water to water all the lawns. So the whole subdivision is so that's a source right there is water reuse. Some people talk about the reuse where you actually put it back into your water system. That's a little more treatment, and that's a little more politically difficult to explain to people. But there's a lot of other uses. On the South Plant in McAllen, between the golf course and the industrial customer, they use about 50%. So McAllen's, 75% of their sewer water is being reused already. So reuse is a good thing to do. Distribution is another issue. So we talked about saltwater distributions and issues. River water distribution is an issue, and distribution is probably the most expensive and difficult thing to figure out than anything.
Any closing thoughts, Mayor?
Yeah, just be conscious of it. People, we take it for granted, and we could be better stewards of our system, including you in your individual home doing it, and certainly elected officials. And think, I think push to get regionalization out there. It's a little different concept where there was a carrot in regionalization was more money.
Uh-huh.
And it's waiting for you. When we did the merger of the university was more opportunity, more money, and look what we've done with the merger. And that was a difficult thing, too. And so the water, it's out there, but I don't think the goal and the advantage has been well-defined enough to have everybody say, okay, it's time we can do that.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Jim Darling.
Welcome.
Thank you for joining us for Season 1 of our podcast. We'll see you in January 2025 for Season 2 of RGV On the Rise.